his legacy, campaigning to secure his legacy.
Okay guys, thanks for joining us for another Facebook Live. We're trying to do these as we move around the United States on the campaign trail with Hillary Clinton, or in this case, President Obama. We're coming to you from the great city of Chapel Hill in North Carolina. That's the home of and the main campus of the University of North Carolina. If anybody's thinking of an American college, highly advised here. A lot of fun, a lot of smart people, and a lot of politically engaged people. As we found out today when President Obama came into town, his basic goal here, no secret about this, is to try and galvanize two demographics, to try and basically sort of throw his his almost sort of legendary coalition that got him into power 4 or 8 years ago, and try and sort of shift it towards Hillary Clinton. Of course, those two demographics are African Americans and millennials, younger voters, those under sort of 35, 30, of which Chapel Hill has obviously tens of thousands. So that's what the mission was. Did he succeed? I'm not sure he did. I mean, the people who we saw in the crowd today are those who are going to vote for Hillary Clinton anyway. They're the politically engaged, they're on the left. They were probably 6 months ago Bernie Sanders supporters. So whether President Obama today shifted this election needle at all, I don't know. But look, it's getting close here, both in terms of the polling and in terms of how many days to go before the vote. So it is interesting, and if you've got any views, any thoughts, then just fire away and we'll try and answer some of those questions as best we can.
Robert, Cliff Wood has just made a point rather than a question,
Yeah.
about saying is Donald Trump Obama's legacy? It's quite an
Interesting question, Chris. That's a very thoughtful point, isn't it? Because, I mean, what we have seen in the last 8 years is a divided America, a polarized America, and I suppose Donald Trump, as I recently was reporting on a documentary, we made a mistake thinking he came out of nowhere. He didn't come out of nowhere. He came out of sort of years, even decades of sort of globalization, of the sort of decline of industrial towns in the heartland of America. So I think it is fair to say that Donald Trump is the legacy, I don't think of Obama, but certainly of sort of economic dislocation and of political paralysis in America. So good point that he doesn't come out of nowhere, he comes out of the past. But I think harsh to say that Obama provided the opening for Donald Trump. I think the forces behind Donald Trump were growing over the 70s and 80s when job losses and jobs were being exported back to China and India, Mexico and places like that. I think that was the kind of the economic dynamic force that really triggered what we didn't know then, but has emerged to be the kind of phenomenon of Donald Trump.
Jamie Robertson asking, has President Obama done enough to galvanize the African American vote? I guess over the past 4 years and really in the last couple of weeks.
Good question, Jamie. I mean, I think the thing about voting blocks is, and maybe that's to the kind of credit of a robust democracy, is they can't be transferred. You can't, there can't be a politician like Barack Obama who just says to his voters, vote for Hillary Clinton. They're different characters. They've been around, they just operate in different contexts. Barack Obama was a unique political personality. He was like a shooting star coming out of Chicago from nowhere, a completely fresh face, an orator of extraordinary ability. Yes, maybe a less than perfect president, but an extraordinary political figure. How much bigger contrast is that with Hillary Clinton, who we've known about for decades? We're kind of weighed down with the Clinton family scandals at the time when Bill was there. So they're utterly different characters. I don't think Barack Obama can transfer his kind of voting constituency to Hillary Clinton. He can try and motivate voters, of course, and that's what he did today, but I don't think he can transfer en masse the kind of the building blocks of the Obama coalition.
Brian Radford questioning Obama's legacy, saying that race problems now worse than ever in America. It looks weak to the world. Medicare is exploding. Is Obama's legacy overstated?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I guess it's where you are on the political spectrum, Brian. I mean, I don't doubt that President Obama has been, in some ways, a success. Not necessarily in terms of, public policy, but he has made America have a conversation about race and criminal justice and the value of healthcare in a developed country that I don't think America was having before. So I think what he's done is, in many ways, is kind of reignited the debate. Now, obviously, there's been fallout from that. I mean, we've seen it on the streets of many urban cities over the last couple of summers, but I don't think we can blame Obama directly for that. I mean, maybe he showed a lack of leadership. He would say, look, how could I lead in some key public policy areas when I had a Republican Congress that was absolutely determined to kind of paralyze my administration. So he will say that he did his best and it wasn't a perfect outcome, and he would acknowledge that, I think. But yeah, we're going to debate this for years. There's no question. I mean, I can't come up with answers now. I don't think historians will in 5, 10, 20 years. It's going to be something that we have to think about for decades to come.
And Robert, I mean, just where you were today at the University of North Carolina, I mean, it's clear to see that Obama still has amazing rock star appeal to some sections of society, not least sort of millennials. I mean, what was your take on just the reaction that he got today?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of drinking in the atmosphere in some ways, not because I'm a kind of acolyte or a sycophant of the Obama years, but this might be one of the last times I've seen Barack Obama take to the political stage, you know, in front of 10, maybe 15,000 young people. And, you know, you watch him come out, I mean, he is still, as you put it, Matt, in that question, you know, he is something of a rock star. I mean, we watched here, if you've been here 3 or 4 hours ago in this lovely university town of Chapel Hill, there were lines maybe 1, maybe 2 miles long, packed with students desperate to see President Obama before he leaves office. You know, we can rubbish his legacy, we can highlight the failures, and all of that is valid and what we should do, but we also need to acknowledge that he is a remarkable political personality. We saw that today, and that perhaps is my takeaway from what I saw today is, you know, he's being kicked and bruised and battered, and maybe that's all justified, but I just have this suspicion that if we fast forward 1, 2, 3 years into this next administration, whoever becomes president, there's going to be a significant segment of America that kind of is a bit nostalgic about President Obama. You know, he hasn't been scarred by political scandal. You know, he's got a wife that is widely admired. He's got 2 gorgeous daughters who have grown up in the public eye and haven't embarrassed him at all. You know, it is a remarkable first family. So that's what I was thinking about in front of those 10,000 students, is that's some legacy. And, you know, it may not have changed the face of America, but it's something to take note of in the final days of the Obama administration.
A question here from Rachel Osborne asking, how is Obama campaigning? Now, it's quite an interesting question because he's got 6 events over 6 days,
yeah,
but notably in 2 key states, Florida and North Carolina. What does that tell us?
Yeah, look, it tells us what part of the Obama coalition, what demographic he's trying to shift. I mean, he doesn't play well, let's be frank, with kind of middle-aged white men. They are Donald Trump's sort of core group of supporters. So he can't go around Michigan or other Wisconsin or other sort of Rust Belt cities, you know, Pennsylvania, states like Pennsylvania, trying to generate support there. There's too much kind of hostility towards the Obama administration there. But if he chooses his location selectively, like here, you know, full of young, idealistic, liberal-leaning voters, he can mobilize people here. In Florida, he can try and mobilize African Americans, maybe mobilize Hispanics to a certain degree as well. So there is a role for President Obama on this campaign trail. I'm just a little bit skeptical if those people are really going to change the outcome of this race, because ultimately they were probably going to vote for Hillary Clinton anyway. So, you know, I mean, maybe if North Carolina is exceptionally tight, you know, there's a few thousand votes in it, maybe he can look at this state in a week's time and say, actually, maybe I did make a difference.
Lucy Collicott makes a point that Obama makes the USA look credible. I mean, do you think that there's
credible or incredible?
Credible. Do you think there's a challenge, given the election cycle that we're seeing, that both Clinton and Trump will be damaged?
You know, Rachel, I think it's a valid point. I mean, you know, some people would say that President Obama makes America look weak, but you know, whatever you say about him, and you know, I've been observing him for the best part of 6 years now, so I know a bit about his performance. He is a cool, he is a rational, he is a thoughtful actor, and when you think about Donald Trump, I mean, he may have, you know, massive attributes as a change agent in America, but you're not going to describe him as cool, calm, and rational. So it is my view that if Donald Trump is elected president, we're on for maybe a kind of a freight train wreck of a story. Maybe that's for the good of America. Who knows? We'll let the historians judge that. But it could be that we look back at this kind of very calm, almost detached president and think that actually isn't a bad style of governing.
Jonathan Manson making the point that Obama maybe hasn't achieved as much as he'd have liked to because the Senate's blocked him.
Yeah, good point. I mean, Jonathan, that's absolutely the kind of White House pitch. There is frustration. Healthcare is has been partially delivered, but it's still a kind of political headache. It's still not working very well. The kind of premiums are being hiked at the moment, which is politically damaging for Hillary Clinton. The Middle East is just a foreign policy nightmare for the White House that they can't escape. Syria is a bloodbath that is going to scar undoubtedly how we assess Obama's foreign policy legacy. So all of that is true, but there will be a constituency that likes how he has conducted policy, and will say the real culprits in all of this is a Congress that is in the grip of maverick Republicans determined to make sure that President Obama isn't successful. The most obvious case of that is this 9th place on the Supreme Court. How is it that he's not able to get a Supreme Court justice in place at this stage of the political calendar? Because Republicans want to block him. So he will always say, look, I did the best I could. I applied a cool, rational judgments where I could, but in many areas I was completely frustrated by Republicans who just wouldn't work with me, and he will put the blame firmly in the direction of Congress down Pennsylvania Avenue.
A couple of final quick questions, Robert.
Sure.
One from Adam Brewis saying why is there such a long gap between the election result and inauguration?
Well, I mean, you could say that, or you could say, given the amount of sort of transition that's required, maybe it needs to be even longer. I mean, the question for me is not so much the duration between passage of time between election and inauguration. That's 3 months, but the duration, the insanity of the duration of these actual election campaigns. I mean, I've been on the road now on and off for kind of 2 years. It feels like, in Britain, of course, we have an election that lasts 3 or 4 weeks, and and we complain about the duration of that. Imagine a campaign that lasts 2 years, and I can tell you this for sure. Already 2020 is now in play. People are already jockeying for that race, and even some people talking about 2024. That's how absurd the American political calendar has become. I mean, my takeaway, and this is perhaps a final thought, is that America is flirting quite close to being a kind of a pretty much a politically failed state here. I mean, its institutions are ridiculed by vast numbers of Americans. People have a lamentable view of Congress. They have a very low view of the president in many cases. Many of the agencies are regarded with contempt as well. Even the FBI, the most reputable of them all, is now in the political crosshairs. So, I think America is in some trouble. The political system hasn't addressed the degree of alienation, the economic frustration that is out there that underpins the rise of Donald Trump. So I just feel that the American political system is failing. I think this election is showcasing that, and I don't know where it goes next. If Donald Trump wins, of course, that's going to be a global earthquake, and will raise questions about whether this country is really a bigoted and racist place. And if Hillary Clinton wins, well, people are going to say, look, that is a definite kind of equation for long-term investigations, political paralysis, and so on. So whoever wins, we're facing a really very difficult future. It points to me to a longer term kind of systemic failure that American democracy is just not answering the kind of aspirations and demands of ordinary voting people. So, I'm happy to take a few more questions, but I think there's a fundamental problem here with how America is doing business politically, on many levels.
Just 2 more questions, Robert.
Sure.
First of all, when Lynn Kelly's asked a couple of times, when will we actually know the results of the election?
Well, I mean, in a week, a day, a year, who knows? I mean, look, by all conventional standards, we should know by the early hours of Wednesday morning. In the UK, that's going to be kind of by breakfast time in the UK. But we have a candidate here who is saying that the system is rigged, who may well choose his favorite course of action, litigation, going to lawyers and questioning the outcome in certain states, particularly if they're exceptionally close. So we could end up easily with this case going to either state courts or ultimately to the Supreme Court if it's close, certainly if Donald Trump regards it as rigged. So who knows when we know a final outcome. Theoretically, if it's a clear victory for Hillary Clinton or for Donald Trump, we could know by breakfast time in the UK on Wednesday. I suspect this has been such an extraordinary campaign. It may have some more twists and turns in it, and it may be that, goodness me, this ends up in a Supreme Court. And of course, there's a little kind of ironic twist to that, because of course the court hasn't got on its ninth decisive judge. It's split 4-4. So imagine the constitutional crisis then. We're in election times. Somebody's litigating. It goes to the Supreme Court. They're split 4-4. There is no ninth judge to break the tie. You know, wow, that's the stuff of political and legal nightmares.
And final question, Robert, just because we started talking about Obama's legacy, I mean, were Donald Trump to take the presidency, how much of Obama's legacy do you think would be endangered, rolled back as a result of what Donald Trump would do in his term?
Well, to be honest, I think I agree with one of the earlier questions. If Donald Trump wins this election, Obama will be seen as having overseen an America that is lurched from the mainstream to the fringe. He'll be seen as an America that is broken and bankrupt. I mean, you know, I don't want to be too partisan about this, but Donald Trump is, you know, in the views of many people, you know, some of the most thoughtful Americans and some of the best policy analysts in this country, is just completely unqualified to be president. If he becomes president, the legacy of Obama will be having created the political conditions for the rise of Donald Trump, which does kind of reference back to an earlier question. You know, Donald Trump's made crystal clear that on day one, Obamacare is gone. That's his greatest domestic challenge. He's talked in wildly ambiguous terms about what he's going to do in the Middle East, particularly with regard to ISIS and Syria. He's made clear he's going to build up a wall on the Mexican border, completely reversing the idea there should be any kind of immigration reform or any sense that America should be a place open to people of all talent who want to come here through a legal mechanism. So I think on multiple fronts, the election of Donald Trump would be cataclysmic for any sense of Obama's legacy. So let's wait to see where we are in 5-6 days' time. But that would be, I mean, I think he would be crying in the residency of the White House. Hillary Clinton would be shell-shocked on the porch wherever she goes to in Washington or Little Rock, and we would have the greatest political story of our lifetimes, because Donald Trump, as President of the United States, and no less as Commander-in-Chief of the greatest military, who extols the virtue of being unpredictable. I mean, that's an earthquake of epic proportions on the Richter scale. So let's see where we are, but I mean, let's just keep trying to talk on these Facebook Lives. It's a fascinating moment in American politics. Remember, you have to like the ITV News Facebook page to take part in this conversation. So I always try and say that, and we'll keep doing these as often as we can. Thanks for your questions. Look, just one more note. I don't know what's going to happen here. I'm confused, as most Americans are and as most journalists are here, about how this plays out. All I know is that this is perhaps one of the great crossroads in recent American political history. So let's be observers, let's be spectators, and let's hope that whatever happens next Tuesday, that it doesn't end up either in court or any civil disturbances on the streets.